what do you notice inside in your body as you're thinking about your first dating experience or as you're trying to answer this question?
Stress and anxiety.
Okay. Yeah. So that's a feeling. What do you notice in your sensations, like in your body, if you couldn't use the word stress and anxiety?
Okay. Heart elevated a little bit, stomach twisting a little bit. Yeah, I can definitely feel that. So I think even without a specific example, I think we're already starting. Welcome back into the Rocc Pod, presented by the Royal Oak, Michigan Chamber of Commerce. I am John Gay from Jag and Detroit Podcasts.
I am Lisa Bibby, your neighborhood realtor with Keller Williams Advantage.
Very excited for today's guest. I think it's going to be a great conversation. We're talking to Sarah Rollins of Embodied Wellness. Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Okay, before we start, I love this little factoid about you. Is it true you played Carnegie Hall in a kids' klezmer band?
It is true. I also have recorded about 2 CDs with them. So yes, fun fact.
Well, first off, I do have to say, believe it or not, you are the second podcast guest that Lisa and I have had that's been in a klezmer band. Shout out to Howard Collins of Galloway and Collins. He plays in a band now called Gesundheit and plays Yiddish stuff all over the country. It's really cool. So we'll have to make sure that we get you and Howard connected if you're not already.
Yeah, have you met Howard?
No, I have not. That is hilarious.
Yes, you guys are definitely going to have to connect.
So how do you end up at Carnegie Hall?
Well, like I said, I was in middle school, so this was all my mother's doing. But so my brother and I were in this band through our synagogue, and the leader of the band got us to Carnegie Hall. So it was pretty cool.
And you grew up here, right? Or you grew up in New York?
No, I grew up here.
Okay, so you got to go to New York for this event. Very cool.
Yeah.
Nice. That sounds like a fun road trip.
Yeah, it was cool.
So we wanted to talk with you about your company that you started, Embodied Wellness, and you started this during COVID. So was the state of the world at that point a factor in why you opened your doors?
It actually wasn't. But now that I opened it, I'm like, yes, we really do need this. So it actually worked out perfectly in terms of how and when I started.
So tell us a little bit about your background and why you decided to start the business.
So I'm a mental health therapist. I'm a social worker by trade, and I was working at an agency, and I started taking a training called somatic experiencing. And in lay people terms, all that means is a trauma training that integrates the body into treatment rather than just the mind, like the thoughts that we have and the feelings that we have. And so I tried to integrate what I learned into the agency that I was working at, and I felt like it was round peg, square hole. I couldn't really do it. And so COVID hit, and I was like, oh, cool, I can do this virtually. I had a little bit more time on my hands. So my goal was to see 4 clients and not lose money. That was my only goal. I was so scared. And then I realized that, oh, wow, people really needed this treatment, and it just grew and grew and grew. And here we are.
Well, I think that's fantastic. And I wanted to kind of back up just a little bit because you talked about, a lot of symptoms, pain symptoms and trauma showing up in the physical body. And I feel like within our society, there's such a disconnect that we only think it's in our physical body and not connected to our minds. And yet it's a very powerful resource to find out that your physical ailments are absolutely connected what's going on in your mind and what's going on in the trauma that you even experienced as a child. It could be generational types of trauma that get passed down into your genes. And a lot of these things show up in your physical world.
Exactly. So it's not just pain. Pain can be part of it, but even just hypervigilance, like worrying about what's coming next, or constantly kind of looking over your shoulder, kind of fluttering in your chest. Like that's a common thing that people experience, or kind of stomach aches. I know that's pain, but it's not like chronic pain that we talk about. Headaches, migraines. Another thing that people constantly talk about is anxiety. And so sometimes anxiety is due to trauma. It's not due to like kind of just worry that some people think it's just separate. So these are all things that we can look at, not just by saying, what are you thinking? What are you feeling? But really looking at, hey, what's going on in the sensations in your body and tracking those.
Mm-hmm.
I have to say, I have had a history with anxiety. I'm on medication for it right now. And when I was single and dating and I would go through a breakup, I would be physically sick. I wouldn't have an appetite. So you're really hitting home for what you're saying right now, Sarah. I'm curious if we could dive in a little bit more on the somatic therapy. And you're talking about that mind-body connection. What does that therapy look like?
Yeah, great question. A lot of people wonder that, and we do online therapy. And so a lot of people are like, well, how do I connect to the body online? That is one of the most common questions we get. And one of the things I say about online therapy is that it's a preference. So some people love it and some people hate it. So would somebody be brave and do a little bit of a quick demo with me? Just quick.
Yes. Do you want to do it, John, or should I?
You sounds like you're volunteering me, and I've already, I'll do it. Okay.
Okay. So start telling me something in the present moment, or it could be in the past. It could be like a dating situation you had in the past, and we'll go from there. Okay. If you're willing.
Okay. I got to think about this for a second. We'll
I know I'm putting you on the spot.
That's all right. I'll try to think.
It could be when you, like your first dating experience ever. How was that? Has that softened it a little?
Oh, gosh.
Well, so even right now, okay, what do you notice inside in your body as you're thinking about your first dating experience or as you're trying to answer this question?
Stress and anxiety.
Okay. Yeah. So that's a feeling. What do you notice in your sensations, like in your body, if you couldn't use the word stress and anxiety?
Okay. Heart elevated a little bit, stomach twisting a little bit. Yeah, I can definitely feel that. So I think even without a specific example, I think we're already starting.
Exactly. But that's the thing, right? It's like when we check in, we don't even have to have a specific example because that is the example. It's just thinking about an experience creates sensations in their body.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how do you work through that with a client?
First is noticing and slowing down enough to pause and notice that.
Mm-hmm.
And you did what a lot of clients do is say, I'm noticing stress and anxiety. And that's okay. That's great to notice. And then what we have to do is say, good noticing, and then go to what sensations are those, right? Because heart racing could also be, hey, I just worked out.
Sure.
Right? Or I'm really excited, right? Like, who knows, right? So what tells you that I'm stressed and anxious or that you're stressed and anxious? So then we start to really track that and kind of sit with those sensations if that feels okay, because sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it's like, whoa, that's too much. And so then we back off a little bit.
What do you mean by back off? Because obviously if somebody's willing to kind of dive in with you and get to the nitty gritty of the underlying what's going on and they want to deal with it, process it, etc. But then if you have a client say, oh, you know what, this is just too much. I'm overwhelmed. I can't go here right now. What do you do in that situation?
Yeah, and that happens a lot. So sometimes we say we're ready and we think we're ready. And then once we get to a really strong sensation, our bodies are like, no. And we never want to override that. We want to make sure that even though the mind cognitively wants to do something, if our body is saying no, we want to make sure that we listen to our bodies. That's part of this whole somatic experience.
Okay.
So one way we can back off is one of my favorite techniques is saying, can you notice that sensation only a little? So maybe 10%, 15%, rather than putting all of your attention into the sensation.
Okay.
So I know you guys can't see John, but I literally can watch his energy shift through this whole process, and his physical demeanor completely changes from the point when you first asked that question and then you started thinking about it. So now I can see that revelation, because there's something where we instantly jump to those terms like it's anxiety, it's stress, it's we're feeling, whatever, triggered. But then the reality of the next level of that is breaking that down and what exactly are you feeling? And that sometimes is hard. Like, is it a pit in your gut? Is it your heart? Is it just like, are you breaking into sweats? Like when you start to notice those, I think it helps shift your focus. And I do some techniques too, because, in real estate, we have anxiety all the time dealing with multiple parties of craziness. But so a lot of techniques that I'll use is a breathing technique because you want to calm down the nervous system. The nervous system is what actually acts up and creates all of these phenomenons in your body.
I've also heard of like tapping.
Yes.
Tapping on your forehead. And you eventually focus on that and it takes the focus away from the symptoms of whatever you're feeling.
No, these are all great techniques. And what I say to people is that one size never fits all, right? Like we never buy the one size fits all pants. It always looks good on the model and never looks good on us. So I like to have multiple tools in our toolbox because sometimes breathing techniques work in one situation and then we try it in another and it doesn't feel so great. Or tapping works in one situation and it doesn't work in another. So it doesn't mean that we're doing it wrong. It just means that our nervous systems change from one moment to another. And so we need, that toolbox full of different things. We don't always use the hammer. We don't always use the wrench, right? So that's why it's great to have all these different techniques because sometimes we need something else.
Can you talk about different techniques, Sarah? What is EMDR? I know that's something else that you specialize in.
Yeah. So EMDR, the reason it's an acronym is because it's a mouthful. It's eye movement desensitization and reprocessing.
Explain.
The essence is that it's another trauma treatment. It also works with anxiety or phobias, a lot of different mental health conditions. But the essence is that using eye movements or bilateral stimulation, which that's just a fancy word for bi means two, so back and forth. So you can also do tapping, but you're not really tapping different parts of your body. You're just tapping back and forth.
Okay.
So that comes later in the processing, though. A lot of people, when they hear EMDR, they think, oh, I'm going right to the eye movements. There's a lot of prep before the eye movements, but what you're doing with the eye movements or the bilateral stimulation is you're reprocessing a traumatic or stressful event. So it's less distressing. Let's say you're thinking about your past dating experiences or whatever.
We gotta get a different
be.
example with them.
I'm just being silly, but
no, you got it.
Whatever it may be, it's not that it erases in your mind. It's not that it goes away. Of course, we can never take memories away, and that's not the point.
You mean you don't have one of those Men in Black zapper things?
Sometimes I wish, let me tell you.
Right?
Sometimes I wish, but what it does is it helps the body and the mind integrate those memories so you're no longer so distressed by them. And the symptoms that you're experiencing, those heart racing, the hypervigilance, maybe avoidance symptoms, those reduce too.
And that's by rapid eye movement as you're thinking about it and processing it, you're almost like retraining your body is what you're saying.
Correct.
And the crazy thing is your mind does not know the difference between reality and a thought. Like you're right. You cannot change the past situation, but what you're working on is changing how you feel about it. Another technique that I've used personally was you sit down and almost imagine that event happening on a video screen and you have a remote in your hand. Basically, you're watching this unfold and then go ahead and hit the pause button, hit the rewind button, and literally see the outcome of it completely changing in a positive way that you would want it to be in your now future self.
Yeah. So in the therapy world, we call it a corrective experience.
Ooh, yes. I love it.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask you about the importance of mental health in the workplace. Can you touch on what you can do for employers and employees?
Yeah. So I think it's really common that, we've all in our studies or advanced trainings learned about like logical techniques. So I've learned, okay, this is what I'm doing in my job, but we don't really learn how to manage our emotions or communicate effectively.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that's such a disservice because we're all humans. We all have emotion. We all bring in baggage into the workplace. And if we only know how to do our technical jobs, but we are not taught to understand human behavior, like I said, it's such a disservice.
Can we bring that back into like our elementary, middle school, and high school and like make sure you need to have this class before you graduate high school?
Oh my gosh.
Imagine how much different the world would be.
I agree.
I'm just thinking of the movie Office Space where the angry guy yelling at, I take the orders, but I don't deal with the people. I can't deal with the people.
Right. So I think it's half the battle, right? Of course, we need to know what we're technically doing. Of course. And working with people is also most of people's jobs in at least some capacity. Right. We have a boss, we have colleagues.
I remember a few years ago, I was working at what was then 98.7 AMP radio. We had a very difficult coworker, and eventually the coworker was terminated. And I'll paraphrase here, but the big boss said, listen, you can be bad at your job or you can be a jerk, but you can't be both. If this guy was getting great results, but he was a little hard to work with, they would have put up with him. Or if he may not have been the most successful at his job, but really was good for the, morale in the office, maybe they would have kept him. But you can't be both. You can't be bad at your job and nasty to your coworkers. And that's why they ended up getting rid of him. That always stuck with me is, ideally you're good at your job and you're good with your coworkers and you have that aptitude, but also that EQ in the office, which I think is kind of what you're going here for, Sarah.
Yeah, I love that, the way you phrased that. Like you said, ideally we're both. And sometimes we're going to have a bad day. That's not the point.
Sure.
But overall, knowing how to read people, how to help ourselves when we're having a bad day. What do we do? Do we do those breathing techniques? Do we check in with our body and say, hey, what am I noticing inside? Can I reduce some of that stress? Can I reduce some of that anxiety? Right? Because, I've been in situations where colleagues or my boss just tick me off. And do I want to say F you? Yeah. But can I? No. Right? And I can't just walk around with a grumpy face on. Like, it just doesn't work. So we have to figure out for ourselves how to manage that stress. And I don't think a lot of us have those tools. And even if we do, how do we practice them? Because knowing it and putting them into practice is a very different thing.
Well, and I think that forces you to grow as a person because, your knee-jerk reaction on how you want to respond to somebody who's basically attacking you or being negative to you could be to dish that right back. But you're growing as a person when you can stop and evaluate what they're actually giving you and figure out a way to communicate with them so that they actually get the point. Like I'm pretty queen at this. When somebody's coming at me, I will literally look at them with a huge smile on my face and I come to them with compassion, but I hit them with a comment. And they're not seeing it coming because, they're expecting, oh, well, she just let me push this one over. She's smiling and she's happy. And I'm like, yeah, no, but I'm about to drop a comment that's gonna hit ya. But I do it, it's a way that they all of a sudden they receive it versus if I would have just turned around and started cussing at them, my goal wouldn't have not been accomplished.
I just appreciate the free therapy session today from Sarah because I think Lisa and I are getting a lot of stuff out today.
And I'm like, do me next.
You didn't volunteer, but you can volunteer next,
Oh, maybe not in public.
Sarah, you have given us a lot of great information today. And I joke about it being a therapy session, but there's been a lot of really good stuff today. What should one of our listeners consider when looking for a therapist of any kind?
Definitely. So the most important thing is you have to feel comfortable with your therapist. And that can take time to develop. I think about finding a therapist as similar to dating.
Yeah.
Seriously. Obviously, you're not dating your therapist, but you have to feel comfortable. You have to feel like, hey, I kind of click with this person. If you feel like, I don't even want to tell this person things, like I don't feel comfortable around them. I don't feel like they respect me. I don't respect them. It's not a good fit. They could have all the training in the world. It doesn't matter. So a lot of therapists have free 15-minute consultations. Utilize that. Talk to them. See if it feels like they kind of get me. You also might have to have a couple sessions with them to just get their vibe.
Sure.
But like I said, it's kind of like dating where you have to, unfortunately, go on a couple dates, feel it out. But if it's a total no, even if they have, meet all the check marks, it's a no.
I've done that. I've had to find therapists in different states because I've moved around a lot. I found a therapist in Massachusetts, Vermont, Michigan, Louisiana. I had to keep finding new therapists every time I moved. And I've got one now that I think the world of here in Michigan. So, and I've had a couple where I've gone, you know what, this vibe isn't right. This person would be very good at what they do, but I'm just, like you said, it's a date thing. I'm not clicking with them. They'd be great for somebody else, just not for me.
Yeah.
So, Sarah, now it is time for our fishbowl question of the day, where we ask you a totally random question.
Now she had the look on her face like the deer in headlights like I did earlier. We didn't tell you this ahead of time. This one's a pretty easy one, Sarah. So hopefully, at least I think it's going to be for you.
All right.
Who was your favorite teacher and why?
Ooh. She was technically a GSI, like a graduate student assistant, and her name was Sarah.
Sure.
I mean, I will say it helps having the same name as me.
Did you both have the H?
No.
Okay.
And normally, I will say people who don't have the H, it's kind of like this weird thing with Sarah's, but I let it go this time. So she was a graduate student assistant or instructor my sophomore year in college. And we just clicked, like kind of what we were talking about. We clicked. And she was my instructor in a diversity, equity, inclusion class. And I felt like she really taught me how to notice my own biases and notice my own whiteness, which I had never really noticed before. She didn't bring out any shame in me. And so that was really helpful because I think as a white person, there can be a lot of shame and trying to be aware of that identity. But I was able to be aware of that identity without shame. It was really helpful.
And this is at University of Michigan?
Correct. Yeah.
Go Blue. Okay.
Yeah. Go Blue.
Well, it was so great to have you on our podcast today, Sarah. And I feel a little bit calmer. John, I'm assuming you feel a little calmer too?
I do. It's been a great session.
Fantastic. Well, Sarah, would you give us your contact information so if guests are listening and would like to get a hold of you?
Of course. Do you want it now or put it in the show notes?
Both. You can tell us right now and we'll put it in the show notes.
Great. Okay. So our website is embodiedwellnesstherapy.com. And in that, there's a contact us and you can fill out that form. I get all of that. We have a team of therapists. We all specialize in holistic treatments. So you can reach out and we have openings. And if you want to get on our list, we're available.
How many therapists do you have there? It looks like the business has grown since you started it in COVID.
Yep. We have 10 therapists. 2 speak Spanish. So if you're looking for a Spanish speaking therapist, we have some BIPOC therapists too.
And I love that it's online because lives are so busy and you've got to accommodate the drive time. So having somebody do a face-to-face online session with you can save you a lot of time. And for those people who are kind of hesitant about they don't have enough time, trust me, it's the best thing you can do.
It is. And we've proved you can do it online today.
Correct. Yes, we can.
Thank you again, Sarah. We loved having you on our show. And my name is Lisa Bibby. I'm a realtor with Keller Williams Advantage. I put the real back in realtor. We want you to love where you live. Questions about buying or selling? Call today. My website is soldbylisab.com. And you can find me on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, and Instagram at Sold by Lisa B.
And I am John Gay from Jag in Detroit Podcast. I'm the podcast guy. If you have any questions about podcasts, you want to start a podcast, you want to improve your existing podcast, you can find me at jagindetroit.com or on social at jagindetroit. Thank you for listening to this episode of The Rocc Pod, produced for the Royal Oak, Michigan Chamber of Commerce. For more information about chamber events or how to get involved, you can visit royaloakchamber.com. Thanks, everyone.